Okay, folks, so the topic for this month is going to be divination, and that is a pretty wide range of practices. I would probably call it its own galaxy of practices, and that can be everything from rune reading, tarot reading, and various other forms of sortilege to scrying, such as with fire, with a black mirror, with water and ink. I've seen all kinds of different forms of that. Uh, it can be pretty much anything that you use to communicate with the gods, ancestors, and the Vetir, the Ginregen, or it can be methods you use to prognosticate in the future, to get an insight on the future or into your own inner self. So divination serves a wide range of purposes, and even in the forms of divination that I do, they can serve an immense amount of purposes depending on what the client's coming to me for a reading on. I have done communication with different gods, ancestors, and spirits with the runes. I've also done some inner work with this client or that client through rune readings. And I've also done, hey, let's look at the future and see if you keep following this path, what the result's going to be. And the fun part, I think, about divination is that it not only is a really powerful method of conversation in terms of us asking questions, but it's also the gods providing us answers. And it's readily accessible whether you're a spiritual specialist or not. You don't have to be an expert in the runes to work with them in divination. You're probably just going to get more out of it if you happen to really know your runes. Likewise, if you're going to read tarot, you need to know what you're doing with regards to reading tarot, and the only way to really do that is to practice it. So that's why we often tend to call divination practice, because that's what you have to do to get good at it. You can start with books and with the booklets that come with the various tools if you happen to purchase them, and that's a fine way to start. But you're going to want to keep on doing your own readings, whether it's for yourself or others. And divination has this really interesting effect, because when you engage in it and you start to really get a feel for the tool, you can tend to get more out of the tool because you worked with it. Whether this is fire scrying and you start to pick up patterns in what you're seeing. Sometimes you have cross between different divination systems. For instance, I've seen runes in fire that give me a deeper amount of information than if I had just tried to interpret the fire symbolism on its own. Divination accesses parts of the left and right hemispheres, if you'll take the archetypal tack, because it can be accessible to folks who don't do a lot of imagery or imaginal understanding or viewing of an issue, but it also can really tap into that for people who do. Some folks get a lot out of the mileage with a divination tool that has a set standard for what each card or each piece of the oracle means. Some folks get a lot out of yes-no divination systems, whether that's flipping a coin, a yes-no, and indicator stone being thrown on the ground or onto a sacred mat. Divination takes an immense amount of forms, and it's probably been with us as long as we've been human. We have everything going back from the I Ching, and even earlier we have the fired plastron shells of turtles that were used in ancient China. We have various old forms of divination from various African traditional religions that have survived through countless millennia and through the Atlantic slave trade. You have modern day rune divination may not be related to what Tacitus was seeing as he reported in Germania, or it might be. We don't really know. Tacitus wasn't really there. He's kind of a suspect source, but even if we have what are tenuous connections between ancient forms of divination for mostly Western polytheists today, it doesn't mean that our modern divination systems are bunk. It just means they're modern. So the antiquity is a great thing if you have it, but if you don't, use what works. Are the gods communicating with you through this reliably? I definitely recommend folks pick up my brother Jim Two Snakes PDF, Spiritual Accounting, and I will link that in the show notes. Excellent resource, and it's something that I think, whether you're divining or not, it's going to be an excellent resource if you're at all involved in polytheism or animism, because it's a way of double checking your bias, and it's a way of working with community to really make sure that you're being as accurate as you possibly can be, especially with regards to gnosis. So divination holds a really important place in most polytheists' lives. Whether or not a particular polytheist divines, they still have access, generally speaking, to diviners in the community. Unless you are like completely on your own and you absolutely cannot use, say, a Zoom call or Discord or something to get a divination service. Those are the only possible points where I think that divination is inaccessible to folks. But if you got access to a computer, you have access to some form of divination. There are even divination apps like the Runemantis app that I sometimes use, which was developed by Rob, a local druid, Rob Henderson, excellent person, and I highly recommend both his Runemantis and his other Mantis apps. Check them out I believe they're on the Google Play Store. And so even if you have no physical way of doing divination, there are plenty of online places you can go. There are tarot reading apps that if you can't get a physical deck because of your circumstance, you can find them online. So divination is more accessible than it's probably ever been. It also means that there's an entire galaxy of practices out there that you can engage in. And it can be as simple as just looking up into the sky and looking at the patterns of the flights of birds. And east means this direction's attributes in your polytheist religion, and therefore a flock of these birds flying east equals this particular omen. Divination can be spontaneous like that, or it can be very regimented, where you can only do it in ritual space and it has to be this big elaborate thing. That really comes down to you, the person, you, the practitioner. How you do divination is how it works for you, really. If you're a spiritual specialist and you've learned from this line of people there's a certain way of doing it, do it that way. If you find that methods of divination that you think are traditional heathen ones, for instance, not everybody needs to read the runes. Some folks can't read the runes for whatever reason. And they do way better with, say, flipping a coin or rolling dice. That's fine. It doesn't have to be traditional heathen, whatever the hell that means, in order to be effective. What matters is, does this form of divination serve as an effective means of communicating with the gods, the ancestors, and the spirits? Does it serve its purpose to help you see future events, if that's what you need to see? Does it help you to look inside and to do inner work? Does the tool do its job? Long story short, because if it can't do the job, then it's becoming a hindrance and something you probably shouldn't be worrying so much about. So if divination is just not your focus, what do you do? What is a good diviner going to do? First off, a good diviner is going to tell you what they're doing, why they're doing it, and they're going to explain their pricing scheme if they have one. In my own case, why do I have people pay $75? In my case, I literally bled for the runes, and I have well over a decade of study and experience reading and working with the runes, both in terms of a divination tool and in terms of a group of spirits. I understand the runes as rune vitir. When I'm feeding them my blood and when I'm feeding them my alcohol, I am feeding spirits. There are folks that don't work with the runes as spirits, and that's their call and that's their view. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. And there's nothing inherently more right about my view either. It's how I understand them, it's how I view them, and it's how I live my life. But a good diviner is going to tell you things like that. In my case, if you're coming off the street to get a reading from me, it's going to be $75. If you're somebody that signs up for my Patreon, it's going to be $45. And some folks are going to balk at that and say, well, I'm not going to pay that. And that's fine. There are other diviners out there. Some folks will only charge you $5. At that point, it becomes a question of what are you paying for? In my case, you're going to get at least half hour to an hour worth of my time and feedback with regards to the questions or question you ask. You don't have to have a question in mind when you come to me if you just want a general reading. Your average reader should be able to tell you what you're getting. Full stop. And if you feel like it's not worth it, don't pay them. Don't engage their service. The next thing that a diviner should be able to tell you is what they're pulling out and what it means. This doesn't mean that they have to reveal every little bit of how they read. They don't have to give you the secret recipe to how they read, if you will. But they do at least need to explain things so that you understand what the hell you're looking at. Because if they're just mumbling shit as they put down cards and it's all vague sounding and it's not really applying to your situation, that's a problem. And for 3, they need to be fully honest if they can't give you a reading or if for some reason they're not feeling it and they need to reschedule. It sucks, but it happens. We're human. Things to watch out for are if this person starts talking curses the moment they meet you, fucking run. If they start talking about how you're so cursed and only I can lift the curse and it'll cost $100 to do it, or they keep going up in price, don't engage them. And this is a person that's looking to grift you. And I just don't engage. Sometimes I have uncovered stuff like, oh, okay, so you've got this ancestor thing or this curse that you're working out, but it's something that I talk with the client about, and it's not something I charge extra to evaluate or to help work out. That's your job, is to sit there with the client and say, hey, this is what's going on. Not, how can I extort more money out of you? So, the longest story short of warning signs is if they're trying to get more money out of you for stuff that has nothing to do with the reading, or if you're still well within the time limit. Let's say they have an hourly rate structure and you're still in that time limit and they're trying to tack more money on, just walk away. This is your money, this is your life, and if your instincts are saying, this smells funny, don't worry about it. Go to a diviner you trust. Go to somebody that's recommended to you if you don't know any diviners. That's the other thing about divination and diviners, is go to people that are reputable within the community. Go to people who have been vetted by other people. Hey, I got a reading from this person. They're really solid. Readers should be able to give you people who you could reference. Like, they should be able to give you people that will vouch for them or will say, hey, this is a good diviner. So it kind of goes both ways. So the community can give you resources, but you can also ask the diviner you're interested in having read for you. You can ask them for references, and you would probably want to, I imagine. I do a lot of networking with other diviners. So if, say, you want a very particular oracle deck that I've never touched, I'm not going to say, yeah, I can still do your reading if that's the deck you want to use. I'm going to refer you to somebody whose expertise is in that. Like, I don't do Lenormand. I don't get it. I can't get it. It reads like Greek to me. So I'll pass you off to somebody if you want a Lenormand reading, because it's just not my bag. You want a rune reading or a tarot reading? Sure. I've had a lot of years of doing that. Lenormand, I don't get it. If you want me to do fire scrying, I guess I could do it, but it's not my first or second tool. If you want somebody who's really good at fire scrying, I'd probably recommend you find somebody else. So that's the kind of thing I think you should be looking for, is somebody that's really willing and ready to admit where their limits are at with regards to a divination system or to divining in general, and is willing to provide you references. If you're looking to do your own divination, there's tons of books depending on what your particular interest is. And if you happen to have, say, a learning disability, there's more books coming out for audio. If you have a visual learning disability, there's more audiobooks that are coming out. John Michael Greer's got one that was going over geomancy. I couldn't make heads or tails of geomancy because it's a complicated system, but he also provides access to PDFs that you can follow along with the audiobook. And it's a really interesting system. I just couldn't get into it. But my inability to get into it is not necessarily your inability to get into it. You might find that a more mathematical form of divination or a more math-oriented form of divination is more your style. In which case, you're going to want to seek out an entirely different milieu of divination than, say, rune reading or tarot. So something like perhaps astrology, which requires a lot of calculation to do well, would be more up your alley. If you have an interest in smoke scrying, well, some of these are going to be really hard to find in terms of books that'll teach you how to do it. Maybe you'll find a YouTube series that really goes into, well, this is what this particular wave might mean, this is the environmental factor you need to watch out for, etc. And some of these divination systems, if you have an interest in them, you might just have to pick them up and try them out. And keep trying them out, and keep trying them out until you get good at them. Some divination systems aren't really well known, and some aren't really written on at all. And some of it you're just going to have to revive. And that's really where the challenge of divination can come down to if you're trying to learn how to do it, is the learning style I'm trying to go for working for me? Or am I just having a hard time integrating the system into where my worldview is? And sometimes it's one, sometimes it's the other, and sometimes it's neither, because maybe you just don't jive with the spirit or spirits of that particular tool. In my own experience, I look at each tarot deck as having its own spirit. So the Rider-Waite has a spirit of its own. There's like the spirit of the Rider-Waite, and then there's the actual Rider-Waite deck that I have in my hand that has its own spirit. That's how I understand them. And so, maybe you're not going to really jive with the spirit of the Rider-Waite deck, but you need to, say, pick up the Robin Wood Tarot. Or maybe it's you need to go away from tarot altogether and go to an Oracle deck, which is more open and isn't constrained by the structure of tarot. Maybe you need to go away from sortilege altogether and try something completely different, like geomancy. You're going to find it over time what works for you. And it might be really quick, and it might be a really long time of having to just keep looking until something clicks. So, whether you do divination for yourself, whether you find somebody to do divination for you, or whether you've got something going on in between, whether you're on the client side or whether you're on the reader side, just keep doing your work, keep practicing, and you'll figure it out. I firmly believe that divination is open to everybody, and that anybody can learn how to do it. So if it's something that you have an interest in, go to it and do the best you can, and you'll get it. I firmly do believe that. All right, that's going to wrap up this episode, and I will see you in the next one.